A traveller on the road 150 years before Christ, who approached the castle hill of Pergamon, would gaze upon one of the most important royal cities in all of Greece. And on the Acropolis, he would find one of antiquity's most significant structures, the great altar of Zeus, an unmatched masterpiece of Hellenistic art. At the time, the altar was almost square in shape. Only the front third has been reconstructed here in the Berlin Museum. Although we can't be sure exactly which gods the altar was dedicated to, in addition to Zeus, the father of all gods, it was probably also erected to honour Athena, the city's patron goddess. Our traveller, however, would not have had access to the sacrificial area. Only priests, the king, and the highest-ranked dignitaries could ascend the steps and enter the upper inner courtyard, where animal sacrifices were burnt on a stone bench. But even 2,000 years ago, our visitor would surely have stood in awe before the largest artwork ever created by Pergamon's famed sculptors, the magnificent frieze that ran around the entire altar. The reliefs would have had an even more profound effect on the ancient traveller than they do today, as they were originally colourfully painted. King Eumenes II had the altar built in honour of the gods, beginning in the year 170 BC. It was undoubtedly partly as thanks for his victory over the Celts, who had held Asia Minor in fear and terror for decades. The frieze too depicts a war, the clash of the Titans. The sons of Gaia, the Earth Mother, rebelled against the rule of the gods on Olympus. Like a three-dimensional photograph, the 113-metre-long frieze shows the violent fighting shortly before the gods triumphed. With a dramatic sense of movement, the battle rages on every side. The Olympians fight in groups against the Titans, with human torsos and legs made of snakes. On the south frieze, you see the gods of light. On the north frieze, the gods of war. To the right and left of the stairs are Dionysus and Poseidon. But the first thing our ancient traveller saw was perhaps the most dramatic scene. He would have approached the altar from the rear, and this is where Zeus and Athena fight. Zeus has engaged 3 Titans at once. His right arm is drawn right back. It most likely once held a lightning bolt, perhaps of gilded bronze. He's naked to the waist, his powerful muscles taut as steel. Facing him, the Titan Porphyrion raises his arm to fend off the blow, to no avail. The next moment, Zeus will strike him dead. Athena, too, is on the verge of victory. With a mighty grip, she pulls the winged Titan Alcyoneus off his feet by the hair. One of Alcyoneus's feet is still touching his Mother Earth. As long as he remains connected to her, new strength flows into him. Next to Athena, Gaia herself is appearing to plead for the life of her son. In vain. Athena will rip him from her. The gods' superiority can be clearly seen in their stances and their faces. The Titans writhe in desperation, pain in their faces. They're at the end of their strength, near death. But the Olympian immortals stand upright, bursting with power. Their expressions are unruffled, almost motionless. Even in battle, they stand far above the mortals. The ancient visitor would have understood the illusion immediately. The Greeks saw themselves this very same way. With their superior civilization, they vanquished the barbarian Celts.
Long before the Romans, the Greeks had become masters of the art of mosaic. Unfortunately, only very few Greek mosaics have survived. This magnificent artwork comes from the dining hall of the largest palace on Pergamon's castle mound. It was created for King Attalus II in about 160 BC, that's to say at the time when the altar of Zeus was still being built. The loveliest part of the mosaic is the border of the center section. It's a frieze with tendrils that have an almost sculptural effect. Birds, butterflies and grasshoppers flit among the leaves, flowers and fruit. Here and there graceful winged cupids play. The frieze is only 20 centimeters wide, but it's a vivid representation of a small paradise. Apparently, the artist who created this masterpiece was quite proud of his work, for this is one of the few mosaics that bear a signature. In this case, it's a rather original one. In the inner section, almost as if it had been forgotten, a note appears to detach from the floor. It says, Hephaestion Epoie, created by Hephaestion. Dubbed the Berlin Goddess and created in about 570 BC, this statue is a magnificent example of ancient Greek art. The sculpture is unusually well preserved, due to a rather fortuitous circumstance. Not long after its creation, it was encased in lead and buried, most likely to protect it during the Persian Wars. So the brilliant colours have survived right down to the present day. The majestic female figure stands solemn and austere. She's so straight that she might be a column. Everything contributes to that impression. The parallel placement of the feet, the completely symmetrical red robes with their even trimming adorned with a yellow-blue-red meander. The yellow coat which lies symmetrically across her shoulders. The straight hairstyle and the pillbox headdress which is typical for images of gods. Even the way she holds her hands seems ceremonial and reserved. Despite the almost geometrical severity of the figure's stance, the details are extremely finely done. The decorative straps of her sandals, the necklace and the meander at her neck, or the lotus blossoms on the polo, the crown-like head covering. The hair falling down her back has been bound into a braid. The statue's stylized face wears the typical ancient smile. At one time, the large eyes, the eyebrows and the lips were also brightly painted. Even now, nobody knows for certain whether the Berlin Goddess is really the statue of a goddess, or perhaps simply a representation of a Greek citizen on her grave. It has no inscription, and the pomegranate she holds in her hand would fit with either interpretation. It's considered the symbol of both fertility and immortality.
The inscription on top tells us that this is a tomb relief of Sosias and Cephisodoros. But which two are the deceased? Although two people are mentioned in the inscription, the bas-relief itself shows 3 people. The 2 figures with shields, spears and pointed helmets are recognizably warriors. They're shaking hands. But the stance of the warrior on the right tells us he's about to depart. He's taking leave of the other 2. His slightly bowed head indicates sorrow. This identifies that man as the patron of the relief. The 2 men on the left side are the deceased Sosias and Cephisodoros, for whom the monument was created. This tomb relief gives us a good picture of how the way wars were fought changed over the years. In the Peloponnesian War at the end of the 5th century BC, a heavily armed infantry called hoplites advanced in closely formed phalanges. But the 2 warriors in this bas-relief carry only shields and spears. They're lightly armed because by then hand-to-hand combat was the norm. This relief was also once painted in colours. For instance, the short spear the middle figure is holding once extended upwards. And you can see that the soles of the men's sandals have been chiselled in the marble, but the straps are missing. They too were once painted on.
The woman leans on a pillar to rest from her exhaustion. She's raised her right arm above her head so her armpit is visible. Small drops of blood run from under her arm. She's wounded. The figure is of an Amazon, the mythical race of women warriors. Here she's shown pensive and resting. This form of representation is completely typical for the peak of the classic era, between about 450 and 420 BC. From ancient sources and other surviving Amazon statues, we know that the Greek original in bronze of this Amazon was first cast as part of a competition. Roman author Pliny writes of how the best-known artists of the classical era were invited to sculpt an Amazon for the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. At the dedication ceremony, the artists present were supposed to pick the most beautiful. Of course, each artist chose his own Amazon statue. However, on the second vote, they all chose the one done by Polykleitos, who thus emerged from the competition the victor. There's much arguing over whether this is Polykleitos' Amazon, and over ascribing the other statues to their respective sculptors. Many believe, however, that this statue is the one by Polykleitos, and thus the most beautiful of all the Amazons created for Artemis.
During the Roman Empire, wealthy Romans were often interred in lavish sarcophagi. The Greek legend of Medea was a particularly popular motif, perhaps because it's a tale of love and heavenly transport. The enchantress Medea helped her beloved Jason to obtain the golden fleece from her father. The couple had 2 sons together, but Jason then deserted Medea to marry Princess Creusa, opening himself up to Medea's dreadful revenge. At first, she pretended to forgive Jason. Here on the left, he's looking at his children, who are bringing Medea's wedding presents, a dress and a chaplet, or wreath for the hair. Creusa sits to the right under a festive garland of laurel. Creusa's hand is touching her groom. This is an elegant transition, because that figure of the young hero Jason is part of the next scene. Creusa has donned Medea's poisoned gifts, and is burning alive. Her father, Creon, is tearing his hair out in desperation. After the first murder, the children of Jason and Medea play unsuspectingly with a ball. But Medea has already drawn her sword and is about to take the ultimate revenge, killing Jason's and thus her own sons. The last scene shows the aftermath of her horrific act. Her hair in a tangle, Medea mounts a cart drawn by dragons, sent for her by Helios, the sun god. She has thrown one of her dead children over her shoulder. The feet of the other are visible on the cart. There are many Medea sarcophagi, but this one stands out by virtue of its artistic mastery. It was probably done between 140 and 150 AD in the city of Rome. This magnificent amphora from the Berlin collection is so beautifully painted that its creator has been dubbed the Berlin painter. The vase's proportions are perfectly planned. It's exactly twice as high as it is wide, and the widest point is exactly midway up. At 23 centimetres, the base is the exact same diameter as the neck. The lower edge of the images is, in turn, 23 centimetres above the surface it stands on, and the handles begin precisely 23 centimetres above that. The elegant painting on the front shows a forest scene. A deer sniffs the air, standing between two figures. It probably smells wine, for next to the deer stands a drunken Silenus, a mythical creature with the ears and tail of a horse. He has given the wine jug and goblet to Hermes, messenger of the gods, who can be recognised by his winged shoes and messenger's baton. The Silenus holds a lyre and a pick to pluck the strings. The figures have been painted over each other, so that the group as a whole stands out from the black background. This was an entirely new form of portraying group scenes. The Berlin painter is one of the most outstanding artists of the transitional period between ancient and classical art. Although he never signed any of his work, it can be immediately recognised by its technique. About 300 vases and fragments have been attributed to him, yet we know nothing about him, except that he worked in Athens in about 500 BC.
In the Old Museum, visitors entering the rotunda are greeted by one of the best-known statues of antiquity. It's an artistic masterpiece shrouded in mystery. Called the Praying Boy, it has quite a bit of road dust on it. It was found in about 1500 during construction of the city walls in Rhodes and brought to Venice. It later migrated to Verona, Mantua, the English court, Versailles, and finally Vienna. There it was bought by Frederick the Great. He had the sculpture installed on the terrace of Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam, so that he could always see it from his desk. Apart from a brief detour to Paris, the bronze figure has been in the museum since 1830. Although no less than 18 different owners of the piece have been verified, no one knows who the figure is supposed to be. When it was found, the arms were missing. The finance minister to Louis XIV had them added. However, the position of the forearms and hands can be no more than a supposition, meaning any interpretation of the figure is open to debate. With his incomparable grace and naturalness, the soft flow to the form of his naked body, it's been posited that he's the young god Apollo, or Ganymede, reaching longingly for the eagle of Zeus. But the statue has also been interpreted as a portrait of Antinous, or as a ball player or athlete who's donning the victor's sash. The current belief among experts is that the praying boy was originally part of a group of figures. Perhaps the figure was handing something up to a carriage driver. All we can say with any certainty is that this graceful figure was cast in Rhodes in about 300 BC by an artist from among the followers of the great master Lysippus.
Caesar and Cleopatra were the most famous lovers of all antiquity. The Egyptian queen was just 22 when the Roman ruler arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC. Cleopatra's brother had banned her from the capital, but she snuck back into the palace hidden in a carpet. Although Caesar was 30 years her senior and already married, they fell in love immediately. He re-established her as queen and stayed in Egypt with her for several months. They took romantic boat rides on the Nile, as shown in the marvellous mosaic from Palestrina that hangs between the two busts. The bust of Cleopatra was once part of a Hellenistic statue. You can see traces of colour on her hair. It was probably painted red and covered in shining gold. The headband-like diadem was brilliant white over the face of gleaming marble, and there can be no doubt that the bust was once a magnificent representation of the legendary beauty. The bust of Caesar emphasizes his assertiveness. Observe the prominent chin, above it thin lips and deep furrows, his broad head and especially his penetrating look. The bust was done long after his death. It was probably also made in Egypt, as evidenced by the material, which is Egyptian slate, but also the hair, which is not sculpted, but engraved. Neither of the busts is a realistic portrait. Rather, they are idealized portrayals of the two rulers. Their love endured until Caesar's death in 44 BC. Cleopatra then became attached to Mark Antony, but their combined forces were defeated by the Roman armies of Caesar's successor, Octavian. When the future Emperor Augustus reached the gates of Alexandria, Cleopatra committed suicide with a poisonous snake.
One overcast day in the autumn of 1882, a farmer named August Lauschke was ploughing 3 deep furrows in his fields in Vettersfelde in Brandenburg to protect his winter seed from the continuous rain. When he checked to see that the water was running off properly, he was surprised to see gold glittering up at him from the earth. He dug up from the mud several woven chains, a massive necklace, a sheath for a sword, and, not least of all, an enormous fish. It was 41 centimeters long and made of 608 grams of pure gold. Several pictures are engraved on the fish with enormous goldsmith's artistry. There's a lion killing a deer. Behind it, a panther attacking a boar. Between the boar and the lion, you can see the legs of a rabbit that has unfortunately been lost. Below the pectoral fin, a man with the body of a fish leads a swarm of fish. The tail fin is an eagle. The tips are ram's heads. The fish probably once decorated a sumptuous shield, and the depictions were meant to transfer the power of the animals to its owner. For his fish, Farmer Lauschke got its value in gold, 6,000 marks, even at the time nothing to sneeze at. But above all, the find was an archaeological sensation. The farmer had found a cache of 2,500-year-old Scythian treasures. The Scythians were a nomadic people who settled in southern Russia. They were in close contact with the Greeks, and their expeditions took them all over Europe, including Brandenburg. Vettersfelde today is in Poland and is called Witaszkowo. We now know that the gold was an offering, but forever lost in the mists of time is the answer to the question of who left the treasures as a gift to the gods in the middle of the marshes.
In October of 1868, infantrymen in the northern German city of Hildesheim stumbled upon a fantastic find. As they were digging out a shooting range, they uncovered a pit. In it were 3 containers, and in them were more than 70 valuable bowls, plates, cups, ladles, small tables, and candle holders of pure silver, some of them opulently plated with gold. The find became even more spectacular when it emerged that the pieces were almost 2,000 years old. The soldiers had found a resplendent Roman dinner service. Most of the silverware was made during the era of Emperor Augustus. Some of it is more recent. But the pièce de résistance, the Athena bowl, is 100 years older than that. In the relief in the centre of the bowl, the goddess sits gracefully upon a rock. Across from her is her sacred animal, the owl. Athena's robes, her helmet and the shield under her arm, are vermeil. The decorative acanthus leaves around the edge of the bowl are also gilded. This gleaming fire gilt contributes to making the bowl one of the most beautiful pieces of Roman silver anywhere. It was probably made in Alexandria, and like the rest of the dinner service, it was not intended to be used as a bowl. Its purpose was solely ornamental, as a precious showpiece on a noble table. We don't know who buried the silver. It might have belonged to a Roman general. We do know that not all the pieces belong together. Some of it is missing, and inscriptions name 5 different owners, so the set was not part of a single household. It might have belonged to a trader, or it might have been stolen goods. That would certainly explain the location where the Prussian soldiers found it, many days' journey from the Roman Empire in the middle of enemy territory.
This bowl is one of the most illustrious masterpieces of painted vases from Athens. It shows a scene of deepest friendship during the Trojan War. Achilles, the greatest hero of the Greeks, bandages the arm of his friend Patroclus. He appears to have been injured by the arrow leaning against the edge to his left. Achilles has opened the epaulette of Patroclus's armor. Patroclus turns his head away, his mouth partially open in pain. He's taken off his helmet, and his curls spill out from under a padded cap of felt. His right leg is bent in front of him. His left leg is stretched out to the very edge of the painting. The bowl is quite extraordinary in its wonderful richness of detail, coupled with the artistic skill evident in the portrayal of the scene. For instance, the way the painter renders perspective by making Patroclus's bent leg shorter than the other one. But above all, for the first time in the history of Greek vase painting, he's painted the figure's eyes in profile. For centuries before that, the eyes were always shown in front view, even when the figures were in profile. To understand how revolutionary that technique was, we need to look no further than the outside of the bowl, where the artist hasn't used it in depicting Heracles' entry into Olympus. The bowl was done in about 500 BC, during the transitional period from ancient to classical art. We don't know who painted it. It's signed on the base only by the potter, Sosias. Accordingly, the painter is now known as the Sosias painter.